Good morning. I'm Deb Wake, the president of the League of Women Voters of Virginia. And thank you for joining us this morning for our final WLRT for this legislative session. Today, we are catching up some loose ends and figuring out where some of the legislation we've been following has ended up. Joan, is Senator Boysko in the room?
She was going to be in person. Her office called last night and said she's not there.
She is not here yet.
Oh dear. All right, let me call him.
Okay. So I will fill a little time while we find Senator Boysko. But last week we did a week-long push for SJ1, which is the constitutional right to vote that is paused while you are serving a felony conviction and then having your rights restored when you exit prison. We had a rally in front of the Capitol on Monday. We attended the subcommittee hearing on Tuesday where SJ1 was killed in subcommittee, just like the House bill before it. And on Thursday, we had a rally at the bell tower with over 100 people in attendance. So 65% of Virginians support this measure. And we think that the legislators need to pass it and let the voters decide at the ballot box. There's one final push to get it heard on the floor today. I don't have a lot of confidence that the speaker will let that happen. And so we'll enter our long run game to continue to push for this. We've pushed for this for a number of years. Senator Yvonne Miller pushed for it until her death, and Senators Locke and Lucas have pushed for it ever since. And so I'm not sure when Senator Miller started pushing for it, but many, many, many years. And it is critically important to returning citizens that they have the right to vote so that they can participate in their communities, the laws that affect their families, themselves, their communities. And so it's a critically important piece. As voting is important for any person who lives in Virginia, it's equally as important for those who have been incarcerated and are returning. Another piece of it is those who have been mentally adjudicated to not understand their finances or other things like that. They lose their right to vote unless they understand the concept of voting, and it would protect them in this bill too. So that's the piece that we don't often talk about. So if you guys have any questions, please put them into the chat. And if you have not joined one of our issue groups, and I want to thank our issue groups for all of the work that they have done this session to track the legislation, to help prepare testimonies and action alerts. And that's really been critical to all of the work that we have done. And if you are not in an issue group, please join one. And you don't have to know everything in order to join one of these issue groups. It's a great chance to learn and to lean in on these issues that are important to you. You can join more than one, but those are a great way to be engaged and to learn. As you know, we are always learning. I would put in a plug for our council, which is June 4th, and it will be held virtually this year. So please join us for our council. We will get an update on the 4 studies that we are doing this year. And Senator Boysko has arrived. Are you ready, Senator?
Yeah.
You put your stuff down. So please join us for our council and find out what's happening with our studies. So Jennifer Boysko represents the 33rd District. Welcome this morning. Oops.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you all. I hope everybody's having a good day. As she said, I am Jennifer Boysko. I represent the 33rd Senate District, which is Northwestern Fairfax County, town of Herndon, town of Leesburg, Dulles Airport, that corridor around 28 and Route 7. And this is my 4th year in the Senate. Previously, I served as the 86th District House of Delegates member, which is a smaller group surrounding Herndon, and served there for 3 years. I am chair of the Broadband Council, and we have done enormous work over the past 6 years. When I joined the in 2016, we had $1 million to spend. You may be aware that with last year's budget, we got a federal funding of $700 million. And we have also made major investments. This year, we will be investing another $100 million. And we have the other issue around, so that's around infrastructure. We have about 23,000 households that are still without access, and those are the really difficult ones. The second thing that we're going to do is work on affordability. And so I've been working with Chad Peterson and Senator Warner's office to get a bill out that will help us harness in the hundreds of millions for affordability as well, so that we have a permanent subsidy for people who just don't have the ability to pay those costs every month. I'm getting a message in here that someone wants me to talk about restoration of rights, and I have spent a lot of time around prison reform and working with people who are formerly incarcerated. It's been a real pleasure to get to know some of the folks. And in the Senate, we passed a resolution, a constitutional amendment resolution that would give automatic restoration of rights, and we had we had to do it 2 years in a row. Unfortunately, the House did not vote to move that forward. And so there is kind of a standoff with the Democrats and the Republicans about trying to revive that. I remain hopeful, but not as optimistic as I like around having that actually work. And it's terribly disappointing because once someone has serve the time, we want them to be able to come back and be successful and re-enter the community. And being able to vote is one of the fundamental rights of every Virginian and American. I will continue to advocate for that. And in fact, I've gotten to know some people who were recently right as Governor Northam was leaving, and just watching the plight and the difficulties that they face every day and just trying to get through life has been really informative for me. And that I will continue to keep that, in mind as I'm looking at public policy in the future. Sydney Johnson asked, what's the current status of, let me just see if I can see what you asked, Sydney, because your question just disappeared.
Senator, I've got it. No worries. She said, she's looking about the $1.7 million cut from Department of Elections budget. And she's also wondering what's the status of that loss, the cutting of the 1.7, what's the bill number? And do we know who the members of the Budget Reconciliation Committee? We do have that, Sydney, we can send you that, but do you know anything about the current status of cutting 1.7 from Department of Elections?
So thank you, Sydney and Joan. Right now, everything within the budget is up for debate. The conferees in the Senate, at least, are Janet Howell, Dick Saslaw, Newman, Barker, and Norman, I believe. Is there one? There must be one more that I'm missing. My apologies for not having that list.
It's in the chat.
Okay, but we are being told, because I'm carrying some revenue bills as well, and in our conference committees, we've been asked just to let the major budget conferees get through some of this challenge, because the the positions in the Senate and the House are pretty starkly different. The Senate budget is strongly supporting K-12 education, higher education, and human services. The House version would not like to invest nearly as much, and they're just looking at tax cuts. And there's just as of last night, they were still at a really a pretty stark difference. And so we're kind of all waiting to see what happens. And a lot of the things dealing with the budget of the individual bills are just kind of on hold as they make those negotiations. So I don't have an update on the electoral budget, unfortunately. Do you have other questions? I'm having a hard time seeing what is here that you wanted to talk about also.
I don't see any in chat. Are there any in the room? In your room where you are?
I don't see anything else. Yeah, so Carol put in the page, the conferees.
There we go.
Senate conferees, which is great. It's Howell, Barker, Hanger, Locke, Lucas, Newman, Norman, and Saslaw in the Senate. And in the House, it's Knight, Austin, Bloxham, Brewer. Those are Republicans, Tory, and Sickles on the Democratic side. So a lot of what we're doing is kind of waiting cautiously. I'm on 10, I'm on 8 budget, I'm not budget, but just conference committees, and I'm expecting to be put on a couple more today. This is the time when either it's, everything's going to be okay or we're going to implode. And so I'm trying to be positive and tiptoe carefully and being a good team player at this point. And I wish that I had.
Sorry, we have a question in private chat about broadband. Can you talk about anything about the broadband legislation, where it wound up?
Yeah, so one, we made major investments, another 100 million for broadband infrastructure in our budget. Secondly, we have an affordability. I was talking about that. I worked with Chap Peterson and Senator Warner and his office to harness money for affordability. I had a few bills dealing with access around getting the infrastructure on the ground around easements and working together with stakeholders when they're putting new developments together that are, just some smaller piecemeal things that we need to address as we are getting to those last 23,000 households. I'm just very pleased at the work that we have done because we are close to completely finishing, closing the digital divide. A couple of years ago, we had 600,000 people who were not served. Now we're down to 23,000, which is phenomenal. We are effectively going to get this done. And it's been a public-private partnership working together with the providers, local governments, and harnessing state money when we have buy-in from both sides in ready to go projects that are well thought out. So we're not, we are being very fiscally responsible with those funds. And yeah, it's just a delight. Thank you all for your interest and continuing to be in good, close contact with us. You all do make a big difference for us to, because you are really following the issues closely, and that's helpful for us that you're well informed. So thanks for your time. And I hope y'all have a great day. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, Senator Boysko. Appreciate your joining us this morning in our last week of session. Our next speaker is here. We have Senator Adam Ebbin with us. Senator Ebbin represents the 30th District. Welcome, Senator Ebbin.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am happy to see you. I've been to this roundtable before, but I believe this is my first time as chair of the Privileges and Elections Committee. And I appreciate your active involvement, not just this session, but through the years, whether we have Zoom or not. And I was asked to talk a little bit about the SJ5, which was the bill that would have repealed and replaced the constitutional prohibition on same-gender marriage in Virginia and what we can do in the future. some Republicans used as an excuse in the House that the bill did not say that marriage was limited to two people, which is, it never said that before the constitutional amendment. But what we're going to do is we'll have to just reword next year to not give them that objection. I think the thing that the League and other groups of supporters can do is keep it on your agenda, and in the election forums and so forth that you have in your positions, to call for a repeal and replacement of the Marshall-Newman Amendment, and to replace it with an affirmative right to marry regardless of gender or sexual orientation. Gender or sex really would do it. So we will change the language the next time we introduce it, with working with Delegate Sickles and advocates, so that there'll be fewer excuses. But we heard some pretty outlandish things, people claiming that it would have allowed for polygamy and so forth, which is already illegal under Virginia code. They said that because marriage isn't defined in the code of Virginia, that it was defined nowhere. And marriage is always, two parties, but we'll say that in the amendment next year to make it, give them one less objection. But really just to let the public know that Virginia's Constitution is not in keeping with the law of the land is important. And the more we keep that drum beat up, the more average Virginians hear that, the more they will ask of the candidates, whether they be Democrats or Republicans, and the sooner that will prevail. So it was unfortunate that this 2-year process didn't work, but we'll get it started again. I understand you might have questions, and if you have questions about privileges and elections, our last speaker, Senator Jennifer Boysko, is a member of the P&E committee. She's a valued member. I just named her to a conference committee on a bill that we're trying to reconcile some differences between the House and the Senate. And I rely on her and the other members. We've stood together like a brick wall against efforts to roll back things that make it easier to vote. And I'll tell you, if we have time, I'll just mention one bill that's in flux right now. I had a bill that was the result of a bipartisan work group that would have provided an alternative to the absentee ballot signature, witness signature. It would have allowed for people to give their last four of their social and their birth date if they chose not to have a witness. And the problem is the House said, in addition to the witness, you need this. And one compromise position I've been offered, which I'm inclined not to accept, is to have only the last four of the social and the birth date on every absentee ballot return envelope that's returned by mail. And the issue with that is, I called up my sister last weekend, and I said I wanted to make her the beneficiary on my banking. What's your social? And she said, I think my social is this. And I spoke to some friends in the legislature who said their college kids have no clue what their social security number is. So by not providing that option, we could be getting some people who return the wrong information, and it would be a material omission. We could make it curable, but I don't like the idea of absentee ballots coming in and then people being told it's the wrong information if they made a good faith effort to return it. So I'm open to your thoughts and advice on that, but my inclination is that it's not worth getting rid of the option to have a witness signature if you don't know the last four of your social. But I could be persuaded otherwise. So here's your chance to weigh in or ask other questions. Are there other questions or questions on this bill?
I do have a question, Senator, on the bill HB 1306, which
Yes.
I believe you're in the conference. This is one of your bills, the firearms, removing the serial numbers. Can you
Yes.
tell us how that's going?
Well, I don't expect it to come out of conference. I had my Senate version, the NRA had rewritten and given it to the committee chairman, so it would have weakened current law and not had a penalty for transfer of a gun that had a removed serial number. So I don't think they're going to change their position. Originally, the Virginia Citizens Defense League supported the bill, and I wrote the bill in concert with them, along with prosecutors and gun safety advocates. But I don't think that there's going to be a support to get Delegate Simon's bill across the finish line in a way that would give prosecutors a meaningful tool that we saw it. So that's unfortunate. I'm gonna just go backwards. And that's what they offered me in committee. And I said, I prefer to straight up or down vote on my bill, and they defeated it.
Okay. Do we have another question? I don't see any in chat. I don't know if there's any in the room. You could tell this is our last event.
Arena Van Breda had put in the chat that you have data about states that don't require additional data on mail-in ballots. And if you want to get that to my office, I'll give you our email address, Arena, which I think you probably have. But Arena, if you send it to Molly or Henry today and just put in the subject line, put urgent absentee ballot bill, so that way it'll stand out, because we're getting hundreds of emails. But if you put that in the subject and see your name, we'll be on, Henry will be on the lookout for it.
Sorry, that was a private chat.
Oh, sorry.
I don't see any questions for the senator, but you are going to introduce the marriage equality bill again. We know that, right?
Yes.
That's a different.
Yes, we'll be introducing it in a slightly different format, so the Family Foundation can tell fewer lies about it. So thank you, and I really value the participation at the Privileges and Elections Committee and encourage you all to consider testifying remotely. We've had good testimony in person from the league and from registrars, but we also get some kind of people who testify via Zoom, what I call frequent flyers, who don't seem to make a lot of sense. So those who want to monitor P&E next year and weigh in when necessary, if there's not been an alternative point of view, that's welcome, briefly. But thank you very much for having me today. Thank you. Good to see you all.
Senator Ebbin, if you have a moment, I would like to address you concerning the witness signature requirement.
Oh, good.
And as you may know, we brought a lawsuit that we used several times during the pandemic, because to us, it was important that everyone could vote safely. We did not see any problems in waiving the witness signature, all those elections that were held.
Well, the problem was that in this past November's election, I believe what happened was we had a state of emergency for the pandemic in the beginning of the election, but by the end of the election, there was no longer a state of emergency. So that really needs to be fine-tuned. If we keep that in the code, when Democrats take over again, we need to fine-tune it to see if there's a state of election at any point in the balloting, because people could vote in the beginning without a witness signature, but when it came time to count those ballots, they had to say you need a witness signature. And some ballots were discarded because of that.
Actually, to disagree, the health emergency was ended at the end of June.
Yeah.
And early voting started.
Oh, well then.
Yeah, and so they did cure the ballots that came in with missing signatures, but we don't know how many that were. Just in talking to registrars, there were quite a few. That was probably the number one. I
got from Arlington and Alexandria a number that was in the dozens that were not cured.
Yeah.
And that's always a problem. That's why I'm afraid about the Social Security number, to require it instead of as an alternative, as the bipartisan work group had suggested.
Right.
So I'm thinking the status quo might be better if that's the case.
And we don't oppose requiring the birth date and the last four of the social, but we would argue that we held elections without requiring it, and it went just fine.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So we'll stay tuned on that one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
So Joan, I don't see Wyatt here in our room, and I don't know if he's there virtually.
I'm calling him.
I would invite anyone with questions to put them into the chat, and maybe we can answer some questions that you have that have just come up from while we're sitting here. We are running a little ahead of schedule. I think everyone is just ready to be done.
Deb, I just spoke to Wyatt. He's going to jump on early, so he's running to his computer. So
Okay.
You can tell it's the last one, can't you?
And I would, we thank Mary Crutchfield for being here in person every week. And I know it was awfully convenient to have this ability to meet virtually, and we've had great attendance, but you can't replace the opportunity for the direct contact that you have by coming to Rich. And I know this is the last one, but just as we do start to come out of our houses, would encourage you to show up in Richmond, talk to your legislator in person. And in fact, now that the General Assembly is ending, they're going to be going back to their home districts, and there's your opportunity to talk to them about what happened in this General Assembly session. We will be sending out a bit of an action alert at the end of session, which should wrap up on the 12th, to thank your senators and delegates for the legislation that they supported. And you could always tell them you were disappointed that they didn't support the things that were our priorities or were your priorities, and ask them how we can get their support. Because things like the right to vote, we will always support, and the right to marry, we will always support. As you know, the voting laws in Virginia were not very kind to women, and we supported those changes, and we support those changes for partners of same-sex unions.
Deb, there's a couple questions in chat. Can you see them?
Let's see.
Expand on the data you have on the absentee ballot. Could you expand on the data you have on absentee ballots and witnesses? Is one. And there's also a question about the budget of important things in the budget.
Okay, I would defer to Arena if you would like to unmute and talk about the data that the work group has collected.
I'm glad to, but let me see if I can find that file. That we did a survey of all the states, and found that there were a good number that had no additional requirements. And I apologize, when I was sending that message, it was to Deb Wake, which showed up on the computer, that Senator Ebbin. But it's good because he might as well have that information. So let me see if I can't find that for us, and instead of doing it out of memory, which is like Swiss cheese. So let me get something accurate.
Okay, thanks, Arena. And I am trying to find the budget question.
What are important items in the budget? Should we bring up the Department of Elections funding? And I know Alice has a big issue with the housing part of the budget as well.
Alice, would you like to speak to that? Okay, go ahead.
Sure. So we are supporting the Senate version of the bill, which includes $300 million for the biennium for the Virginia Housing Trust Fund. That was the amount of money that Governor Northam put in the budget, and the House has only $110 million in, which is base funding for the Virginia Housing Trust Fund. So if you get a chance to talk about the budget, obviously we would prefer the 300 million versus the 110 million. It's a very successful and effective program, and we hope that we can actually serve more people and add on to the number of affordable units in the state. Any questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. And just to remind everyone, I believe it was Delegate Watts was speaking a few weeks ago about how the House cut taxes, and then so they also cut things like affordable funding for affordable housing in the House budget. And Delegate Watts pointed out that we are not back to the transfer of money that we were before the pandemic. And so these are not necessarily surpluses. And I would also remind you that education was cut in 2008 with the financial crisis, and has never been, that funding hasn't been restored. And so those are important things to keep in mind when we're looking at the budget.
Wyatt is here, Deb.
Okay, great. So welcome Wyatt Gordon. He's the Policy and Campaign Manager for Land Use and Transportation with the Virginia Conservation Network. And I have to share that the first time I met Wyatt was at the Commonwealth Institute has a summit every December. And I can't remember exactly what we were tasked with. Wyatt started talking, and it had nothing to do with transportation. I think it had to do with messaging, and Wyatt created a great message about transportation. And because that was the first issue I got involved with the league. And just so that you know, transportation is not my background. I learned everything about transportation from the league, from attending meetings. And so I knew that I needed to meet Wyatt. And so Wyatt, welcome. Great to have you with us this morning.
Hey, Deb, thank you for having me. And happy belated International Women's Day, I believe. And hello, Judith. Yes, meeting me on a public bus is where many people meet me. So I am going to go ahead and jump in. Let's see, I should share my screen. Is that possible?
You're good.
Let's see. Not seeing that option. I can send you the PowerPoint if that's easier.
There is a green share.
It's a
the
little,
screen.
Oh my
little
gosh.
green thingy on the bottom.
You would think after 2 years I would be better at this. And I'm not.
It's early. It's early.
Okay, is this actually working for folks? Perfect.
Perfect.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of a transportation legislation roundup. This is, of course, coming from the perspective of the Virginia Conservation Network. We're the environmentalists. We're a group of over 150 different individual organizations across the state. So everyone from your local garden club to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation is working with us. And what we've learned over the 52 years of our existence is that politicians barely listen to us. And they definitely don't listen to us when we say anything that's not exactly identical. So that is our biggest job in the environmental community, is convening people and getting everyone to agree on one set of issues. So if you want to know more about what our organization does, go to our website. We have our common agenda. This is the big book of demands we release every year, letting lawmakers know, here's the problem, here's how to fix it, and this is the specific policy we want you to pass. You really have to break it down for them because they don't have a lot of attention span for these types of things. Okay, so this has been a pretty crazy session, but in some ways it's been a quieter session than the previous ones that I've experienced, where we had a blue trifecta, as they call it. This one, there's the advantage of having, oh, this is my cat. This one, we have the advantage of the House killing a lot of ideas from the very start, the Senate killing a lot of ideas from the very start. So instead of working 50 bills at the start and then probably about 25 bills at the end, we went from working like 60 bills at the start to working probably a dozen at the end, because that's how much the two chambers disagree with each other. So for your convenience, I have put bills that died in red. Bills that have passed or are still alive so far are in black. Most of those will be awaiting the governor's signature, and they're fully through. There might be a couple that are not fully done yet. Okay, so first I'm going to start with the way that most people get around, at least a little bit. You always have to at least walk to your car. So walking and biking. This was an interesting session for walking and biking. There's not a very deep core of advocates that focus on walking and biking. It's really just an issue that is very at the grassroots level. You only have a couple people who are working statewide full time to do walking and biking advocacy. So although it's something that's very deeply important to how we all get around, the safety of our communities, the safety of our kids especially, it's not a place where we have deep legislative lobbying firepower. So you'll see the very first two bills. These were going to allow localities to lower speed limits to 15 miles per hour in specific areas. So you could do that in a commercial district, say your main street where people are just walking all the time and families go out a lot. You want to make the speed limit lower so that people feel safer. Maybe around schools, or maybe just in a residential space, because the speed limit says 25, but people still go 35. And when you have kids playing basketball out on the street, that's just not appropriate. It's very dangerous. These bills died, unfortunately. And two bills that we did have passed were kind of wonkier bills. Basically, for certain types of charges, if you are convicted of careless driving, it can only apply if someone was injured, but not if they were also killed. So this now added in the ability, if someone recklessly kills you with their vehicle, they can also be charged with careless driving for that. There was also a resolution, which is generally low-hanging fruit in the General Assembly, especially one like this that didn't have teeth and didn't really ask for money. But this was recognizing the need for the Commonwealth to commit to Vision Zero. Vision Zero, very simply put, is a vision that we have 0 road fatalities in the Commonwealth. So this resolution would have said, hey, by 2050, Virginia, we need to make sure that we're having 0 deaths on our roads. And then set an intermediary goal of 2035 to half the number of road deaths. This is incredibly important because over the past decade, pedestrian fatalities have risen by 46%. That's everything from bad street design, increasingly people that have lived in urban environments for the past decades are being priced out of walkable communities. So you have poverty moving to the suburbs, but the suburbs is not built for people who want to walk, bike, or bus. So you have increasing fatalities from that population shift. And then there's also the fact that now people are driving trucks and SUVs that have grills that start 5-6 feet high, which is an automatic killer. You don't have any chance of surviving those types of vehicles when they hit you, even going like 35 miles per hour. Compared to sedans that throw you on the hood, you're much, much more likely to survive. So the types of vehicles that we all choose to drive also really guarantee that there are going to be more fatalities, not just for people who are walking and biking, but also people who are in other vehicles. Even if you have a giant truck or SUV, getting hit by another giant truck and SUV is much more likely to kill you. So this was just a resolution that had no real ask, but just said, we should make this a goal. And the General Assembly said no. Okay, things that we opposed. There was a bad bill that would prevent localities from being able to reduce speed limits as they see fit. Ironically, authored by a Republican. You would think local choice, local control. These are the types of things that tend to be talking points on that side of the political spectrum. But he said, no, this one we were able to defeat, but we weren't able to make any progress on our end either. It's one of those issues just kind of stalled. And then also last year, there was the Bicyclist Safety Act. This bill had 3 big changes that really made cycling safer in Virginia. One of those 3 big changes was to allow cyclists to ride 2 abreast. Legally, previously for decades, it's been illegal for people who are biking to ride side by side, which is really crazy, especially if you think, you're a parent and you want to go bike with your kid to your local ice cream shop 6 blocks away from your house. Of course, as a parent, you want to keep your kid on the inside or kind of on the outside of the lane. And be blocking for them essentially. So as cars pass, they're passing closer to you than they are to your kid. That was illegal previously. That's going to become illegal again because of this bill. A senator brought forward this bill with a completely unsubstantiated story about a guy driving a horse trailer who swerved off the road because there were two bicyclists riding side by side, and somehow he would have not swerved off the road and killed them if it had only been one. So totally made up story. Unfortunately, it does tug on the heartstrings. So this flew through, and now technically cyclists are going to have to go back to riding in a long straight line, which doesn't solve the problem that people wanted. It actually makes it harder for people in cars to pass them, because instead of being able to pass two people side by side, now you have to go all the way around a stretch of people that are riding in an individual line. But anyone who follows the General Assembly knows that policy making does not follow logic, it follows feelings. Okay, the next segment of bills I want to talk with y'all about are about expanding public transit. This is an incredibly relevant topic for as much as people want to say, you know, let's cut the gas tax, let's try and make gas cheaper right now as, you know, we're going through a pandemic recovery and a very disruptive war. The answer really isn't cutting taxes. There are very few taxes on gasoline to start with. Your federal gas tax is only 18 cents, for example. So while 18 cents isn't anything to sneeze at, it's also not going to really relieve the problem. The real way to solve the problem is to help people by providing options to shift away from having to drive everywhere. Car-free, car-light lifestyles can be totally possible. We've just chosen not to invest in providing people that freedom for 80 years because of how we view transportation and who we see as people who use public transportation. We tend to, in this country, see public transportation as mobility welfare, when actually it's something that's really great for everyone, whether you just don't want to pay for your car payment anymore, or gas or insurance, or the roughly $12,000 people spend every year on each car that they own. Or you just had a couple glasses of wine after work and you don't think that you should be driving home. It's really there for everyone, so we should fund it as if it is serving everyone. So off of my soapbox, into the bills. We had two exciting bills, HB 142, SB 342. In 2020, we created this program called the Transit Rider Incentive Program, where we said, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had money to do fun, innovative stuff with public transportation for a change instead of just starving it of funding? So this program was created, had $10 million, and we said that there are two goals. One is regional expansion, and the other one is providing reduced or free fares to riders across Virginia. That was 2020. As you know, people have not been going anywhere for a while due to the pandemic. So what we found is that people were not trying to expand coverage of transit, but what we did have was a terrible economic recession and lots of people struggling. And what we found is that, wow, you know, providing people with reduced or zero fares to access public transportation, there's huge demand for this. It's really necessary for families' budgets right now. So this is where the vast majority of requests for funding came in from public transit providers across Virginia. I think we had like 80% of all applications for this program were asking to do reduced and zero fares. So depending on where you are in the Commonwealth, you probably have a public transit provider near you that is going zero fare. Alexandria is doing this. Richmond is fully zero fare. Charlottesville is fully zero fare. And then you have a lot of localities like Loudoun, Fairfax, up in Northern Virginia that are doing reduced fares or going zero fare for people who are under 18, for example. This has been huge. It's been phenomenal for ridership. You have Alexandria and Richmond in particular breaking historic ridership levels in the middle of a pandemic. This is America. When you make something free, we love it. And that's really what it's doing for transit. And it's helping to get more vehicles off the road and helping to save people money. So these were just very wonky bills that shifted the amount of funding that we could allocate to zero fare programs from just 25% of that fund. Now it has 25% dedicated for that, 25% dedicated for regional expansion, and then the 50% of funding in the middle is able to flex as transit providers see fit. Okay, up next, SB 281. Crazy, weird bill. We have a new director of the Department of General Services who, for the first time in decades, reinterpreted some text in the law that said, if you don't own and operate a dealership within Virginia, then you can't sell vehicles here. That's always been the law. That's why you've seen, mostly if you've heard about this, you've heard about it because of Tesla, because they tried to sell without having dealerships, and Virginia law makes that impossible, which is why they now have dealerships in Virginia, which they don't in most other parts of the country. He interpreted this to also apply to people who sell transit buses. Doesn't really make sense. You don't have dealerships for transit buses. So we had to pass a bill to exempt them, or else no public transit provider in all of Virginia would be allowed to buy a bus. And before you think this is just like, oh, some crazy Republican with a crazy idea, it's not. It's really just one guy who was the deputy director of DGS, a very non-politically engaged agency, who assumed his role and is just, he sees the law that way. It's not maligned or malicious, just one of those crazy wonky things that pop up and you have to deal with. Okay, lastly of the public transit bills that we were supporting and fighting for, it was the Transit Transition Fund. Basically, this would have established a dedicated fund that would be there for us to put money into so that we can start thinking about how to transition public buses away from fossil fuels. The vast majority of buses in the Commonwealth right now, I believe, operate off of natural gas, which is clearly terrible for the climate, not as bad for individuals' lungs and health as diesel buses, which do still exist in the Commonwealth. They overwhelmingly are used as little as possible because transit providers don't want to put fumes into communities. However, they do tend to be used on routes that are less frequented, which tend to be routes that go through communities that don't want air pollution. So it's not good for anyone. That's why we need a fund. Unfortunately, this one was killed. There wasn't any funding in the budget for this, although Senator McClellan fought very hard for this. Basically, people didn't want to create another fund that was unfunded, although we do it all the time. But this bill died. You'll see it back for sure. We already have a fund for school bus transitions and other types of vehicles we're working on as well. Okay, you'll notice everything we're looking to oppose on public transit. For as much as people hate driving has terrible results for us in terms of getting people killed, air pollution, the cost that it imposes on families. We just don't want to fund transit. As a Commonwealth, we're really terrible at funding transit, and Richmond's public transit system and Hampton Roads transit system are the two worst funded transit systems in the country per capita. So we as a state are terrible at this, and we need to get a lot better. These bills would have made it even worse for us. They would have gotten rid of the regional fuels tax, suspended the fuels tax. It would have done some funny stuff with this recordation tax, was a real estate tax, the grocery tax, all of these things for tax relief. If politicians don't set aside money to make sure that public transit and passenger rail aren't hit by this, we would have been looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in losses, which is incredible. especially when you consider the Department of Rail and Public Transit. Their annual budget, I think, is only $560 million. Compare that to VDOT that has a $7 billion budget every single year. And then you start to see just how bad the level of the disparity between paying for just roads and any other way that folks want to get around. That's a 14 times more spent on just building more highways, which encourages more people to drive, which then makes your life worse. There's more traffic. And then we ask, hey, there's so much traffic, can you build more roads? And you're like, well, you're building more of the exact same problem. So anywho, have to always remind myself not to be on a soapbox. Thankfully, as you see, we defeated most of these bills. The only one that's moving forward is SB 541, which is the grocery tax. Gas taxes, clearly we hate. We're environmentalists, so hike them up, encourage people not to drive as much as possible. But we don't like punishing people. It's systems that we need to fix. It's not individuals that we need to scold. And especially on the grocery tax, this is something that just makes sense for low-income communities. So it's not that we're opposed to the concept. It's just that we want to make sure that it's wonderful that low-income communities and everyone across Virginia now will have access to groceries that are slightly more affordable to them. But it's not helpful when you have a mom and all of her kids who get their cheaper groceries, and then instead of having a bus that comes every 15 minutes to take them home, now it's one that comes every 60 minutes to take them home. That's not a win for low-income communities. So trying to thread the needle on that has been tricky, but I think we've gotten some language in there that'll prevent public transit and rail funding from getting hurt. So many kudos to all of the lawmakers who we worked with on this, because having to understand two concepts at the same time is pure intelligence, and it's not something that everyone can do. And the people we worked with were really great. So, okay, the last chunk of bills that I'm going to go into for y'all, and I did arrange these in order of importance, starting with walking, biking, transit. Now we're doing electrification. Electrifying every form of transportation we have is the future, but it is not a silver bullet. It will not save the climate. It will not reduce a lot of the other problems we have. Even things like microplastics. Tire treads are the #1 source of microplastics. So if you want to save streams, rivers, help prevent people from contracting cancer from all these microplastics, tire treads are the #1 source. So electrifying the status quo of transportation is something that we absolutely have to do, and we should do it as quickly as possible, but it will not solve every problem. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, the first thing, we had the Driving Decarbonization Fund. This was a fund that would help build out electric charging infrastructure for vehicles, particularly in places where the market isn't going to do it. Big corridors, wealthy neighborhoods, those are the places that Tesla and other electric vehicle manufacturers, they want to put all of their charging infrastructure there because that's where they think they can make money. Anywhere where people can't make money, which is, 80% of Virginia's landmass that is entirely rural, and then lower income communities within population centers, there's no money from the private sector to put charging there. This would have created a fund for us as the Commonwealth to start thinking strategically about how do we make sure that those places aren't left behind. When we're saying, oh, well, if you buy an electric vehicle, it's so much cheaper. But then we say, yeah, but like your community doesn't really get any charging infrastructure, and we don't care. That's a you problem. That's not solving the problem. That's not responsible. So this would have created a fund to start investing in that type of charging infrastructure across the whole state that we need. Clearly died 2 times savagely. It was sad. A bit of good news is that HB 443, this now allows park authorities to operate electric vehicle charging stations. So if you want to take your car somewhere into the Shenandoah Valley, go for a nice long hike, or if you just want to take your dog to your local park. I would advise you not to drive if you can, but if you do drive your electric vehicle, now you can have charging infrastructure. Previously, it was illegal for park systems to provide electric vehicle charging. So that's been clarified. We also have two bills, very benign bills that say, hey, you know, if there's a charging spot in a parking lot, it makes sense that we should legally say that that's only used for people who need to charge their vehicles. That is not the case currently in Virginia. I believe this will come into effect in July if the governor signs it. But right now, you know, you could park a diesel Ford F-250 in that electric vehicle charging spot, and there's nothing anyone can do. Once this is changed, you'll probably get like a $50 ticket, so nothing life-changing. We wanted to make sure that this wasn't treated more seriously than access to parking spots for people with disabilities. Clearly, this is not more pressing than people with accessibility issues, so this is just synchronizing it to that standard. And let's see, the vehicle, yeah, HB 708, another thing for EVs, killed straight out. It's pretty interesting that electric vehicle politics get kind of scrambled because you have a large number of Republican lawmakers who privately own EVs, especially Teslas, even though they don't make it very public often. But we have like a private internal list that we circulate of who we know who drives electric vehicles themselves. So where you do start to see some bipartisanship on electrification, it's kind of around this, like people, even Republicans who buy EVs realize that they're really awesome for a lot of reasons. So I think you'll see the politics on this shifting over time, especially as you see more and more the large auto dealers doubling down on electrification. They know it's the future. So gradually, I think the politics will shift on this. Unfortunately, the politics didn't shift fast enough for this one resolution we had, HJ 71. This was from the new delegate who replaced Lee Carter. Michelle Maldonado is her name. And she had a study that would have instructed the Apprenticeship Council to start building out electric vehicle infrastructure apprenticeship programs. We know that there are going to be thousands of jobs doing this, and they're going to come over the next decade. We currently don't have any real apprenticeship or program or education pipeline that trains people to do this type of work. Overwhelmingly, this type of work is really high quality union jobs. They tend to be represented by like electricians unions. So they're making very good money, have good healthcare. It's really good work. You know, we need highly skilled labor doing this because it does work with electricity and it's a huge safety thing. But we don't have a way to kind of get people into those jobs right now. So this would have asked the Apprenticeship Council to work on that problem. Unfortunately, it was killed. It was deemed not a priority, something the Apprenticeship Council can just do on its own. Will they? Maybe. We'll see. But we might have a study next year to ask them to do it again anyway. So, and then the last piece of legislation I'm bringing forward to y'all from the environmental community. Deb, do you have anyone else who's going to be doing environmental policy for you?
We addressed it some last week.
Okay. Well, I will say in broad strokes, there have been a lot of stuff for us to oppose. We got a lot of really good things done over the past couple of years where Democrats were in charge. So even though our organization is totally nonpartisan and we don't work on campaigns, we don't do any of that, you know, there's a lot of great conservative voices on conservation. We don't choose sides. Unfortunately, this year we had to come out against a lot of things that would have repealed some really wonderful legislation that we've been doing over the past years. You've maybe heard of the Clean Economy Act. That's really driving our shift to renewables, which is incredibly important, especially in a moment right now where the entire fossil fuels market globally is really volatile and crazy. And that really undergirds the argument we shouldn't be relying on these types of things. You know, we have plenty of sunlight, we have plenty of wind right here in our own backyard, and that's not going to change whether Putin invades another country or not. So it's really important for us to stick to renewables and keep those investments going forward. Reggie, you've also probably heard of. That is a carbon tax on big corporations. And then we pump all of that money here in Virginia into energy efficiency for low-income households to try and reduce the amount of energy people need in general. And then also into like flood preparedness programs. So if your locality has received a grant to look at flooding over the last 2 years, it's probably been paid for with Reggie money. The third policy that we were fighting tooth and nail to make sure that didn't get changed was the clean car standards. This just says that, hey, we in Virginia want to have like electric vehicles slowly come onto the market here. So it was setting benchmarks for how we get there and how clean our vehicles need to be to operate in the Commonwealth. The goals laid out in it are so unambitious that it's not like 5 years from now, 50% of your vehicles must be electric. That's totally not true at all. I think within like 5 years, we want to hit 8% of vehicles being electric. And right now that figure is around 1 to 2%. So very modest, especially as the vehicles industry itself is shifting to electric so quickly. But these bills would have removed those standards. And the biggest way you would have seen this is that pretty much vehicle manufacturers don't send electric vehicles to any markets that haven't passed the clean car standards because they're trying to make sure that dealers hit these benchmarks. So they reserve all of the electric vehicles that they're producing, which is still a relatively small fraction of the total number of vehicles they're creating. They reserve them for these states. So the real impact of this policy, beyond the fun, exciting rhetoric and long-term goals of fully clean vehicles, the real issue was that Virginians couldn't even buy electric vehicles when they wanted to. If you wanted to buy an electric vehicle, you pretty much had to go to Maryland because Maryland passed clean car standards. They got all the vehicles. And a lot of dealers in Virginia weren't able to even purchase them that they wanted to sell. So we actually had the auto dealers, the Virginia Association of Auto Dealers was our #1 ally in this. It's a group that we typically don't work with. This is our first time. But hand in hand with VEDA, we convinced lawmakers that it's really important because their dealers weren't able to even buy electric vehicles to sell in the Commonwealth. So by defeating these two bills that would have repealed those, you'll still be able to buy an electric vehicle in Virginia if you so choose. That is my whole presentation, Deb.
Wow. We do have 2 quick questions. First of all, a lot of thank yous. The charging fees you talked about, are there fees for charging your electric car? And the other one is, does the current fuel crisis offer an opportunity to address climate change?
Okay, starting with the first one. Of course, you have to pay to charge your car. And the way that's going to look for most people is you just, when you buy a vehicle, you get a charger. Comes with it, you plug it in your garage, and boom, now you're charging at home. Unless you're planning to drive across country, this is probably going to be the only place that you ever need to charge. Electric vehicles are so efficient, and most Americans don't drive more than like 3 miles for any given trip. And most Americans don't drive over 10 miles on any given day. That's going to be all the charging you need. And that'll just be something that you'll notice in your electric bill. And it's not even going to be a huge thing in your electric bill. When you're out and about in public, generally chargers will have some type of fee. Some of them are free, but generally it'll just be like you tap your credit card and then you plug your car in and then, you know, go off, get a coffee, do whatever you want. And when you come back, they charge you for the amount of electricity that your battery has used. So nothing crazy, nothing exorbitant, far cheaper than refueling, especially now. To segue into the second question, yeah, I mean, those of us, everyone here is old enough to remember 2011. And in 2011, gas prices were the highest they'd ever been previously. You saw the Obama administration introduce CAFE car standards, like advanced fuel efficiency, something like that. So we had this new round of standards for how efficient vehicles should be. This was kind of when you first saw people start moving back into cities in a really large way. So we've had a decade of knowing that this was the right way to go to reduce our transportation costs when gas are high. And then we unleashed a fracking boom. So gas got really, really cheap across the whole world. And instead of learning any of the lessons that we learned in 2011, or for those of you who are older than me, you can remember back in the 70s, that kind of the high gas prices that unleashed the first wave of cycling culture in the US after the automobile kind of destroyed everything else that we did. Y'all can remember, we've always known that driving gigantic vehicles really long distances was going to be expensive. And there's no amount of reduction to the gas tax that can change that reality. When your vehicle runs off of gasoline, you're at the whims of this large global market that is outside of any one politician or country's hands. And what we don't like to talk about as much is the ways that we can drive less, not necessarily becoming car free, because a lot of households don't have access to that type of lifestyle. We haven't built those types of communities as frequently over the last 80 years. But there are ways to drive less, to walk and bike more if you can. And I would just say for anyone who is interested in public transportation, it's a great time to hop on the bus, especially in places here like Richmond, where our entire bus system is completely free. You don't need to know how to access a ticket. You don't need to know much of anything at all. You just need to hop on the bus and know when to get off. And if anyone is looking for a way that's really helpful to navigate transit systems, I highly encourage checking out Transit app, which is a total nonprofit based in Canada. And they gather up all of the data that public transit agencies provide and then put it in a nice convenient little app for you. So you can do like Google Maps and say, I need to go here. This is when I need to be here by. This is when I want to leave by. And they use live tracking of buses. So you can see exactly where your bus is. And you can go, oh my gosh, my bus is only 5 blocks away. Let me like run out to my stop now. And they give you notifications, get off the bus here, like walk here, do this. So if you don't have a friend who already rides the bus, that is a great way to start. It's the app that I use to get around everywhere. I don't have a car. And yeah, I would just say like different worlds are possible. If anything over the past 2 years have taught us is that life can change really quickly, and being adaptable and flexible used to be things that were great. Now they're things that are necessary. So as much as you can, try and find a way that helps you to get around safely, conveniently, and doesn't use a car to do so. And if you don't have that opportunity based on where you live, then vote to change it. Contact your city council member, ask them for sidewalks. Contact your board of supervisor, tell them that you want to have a safe way to bike to your kid's school, wherever.
Joan, if there are no more questions in chat, I actually have one.
Nope, there's nothing in chat.
Great, thanks. Wyatt, I shared last week, we're going to convert to solar in our home, and you've made me think that we should probably explore putting in a charging station. And so I texted my husband and he said he wasn't sure they've been standardized yet. And do you know that, whether that's the case?
What do you mean standardized?
I don't know. I'm sure it's something he's read,
It's
but
probably the type of vehicle, and the answer would be no, not necessarily. This is something that would be wonderful for Congress to regulate, to make sure that every electric vehicle charger and charging station are all universally adaptable. It's the same thing as like when you buy any electronic device, it has the same two-prong plug. Like, why would we not do that for vehicles? Right now, Tesla has their own type of charger because they want to be elitist, and it's kind of like how Apple products have their own charger, which we could also regulate and just make everyone use a micro USB, but we choose not to. So there are some different types of chargers. There's really only everyone else and then Tesla right now. And even the Tesla chargers, you can have like an adapter that will allow it to be used for other vehicles, or an other vehicle charger adapter to Tesla. So I would say if you're thinking about getting an electric vehicle, wait and get your charger when you get the vehicle, just to make sure that you have the right one. And I would highly encourage anyone and everyone to go solar. My house is fully solar. I've got some panels up on the roof, and I haven't paid an electric bill since they were put in.
awesome. Well, Wyatt, a pleasure to see you again. And thank you so much for all of your information, for supporting mobility and transportation and walkability. Hope that we will make some more progress in the next session. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And hopefully I talked so much that now you're not ahead of schedule and you're back on track.
We are, I think we are at time. So thank you so much.
Yep.
It was a
Thank you,
pleasure.
ladies.
And thank everyone for your weekly commitment to learning what's going on in the General Assembly, to being a part of our democracy. If you are not contacting your legislators or voting, you are letting someone else speak for you. And so thank you for being active participants. That is it. And we will possibly have a special session on the budget. It's something we're trying to work on, but it's just something that we're working on. It's not scheduled yet. And as soon as we're able to nail down some details, we'll let you know about that. So thanks and have a great day. Oh, and Irina is putting her information in the drive. I think, Joan, you'll also send that out to attendees afterwards. Okay, great. All right, have a great day, everyone.